Before we begin, take a deep breath, let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw soften, let go of the day that just passed. Tonight, I'd like to take you somewhere unexpected. Not far, not in miles, but far in memory. We're going to drift into the shadows of Los Angeles, a city that pulses with lights, sound, ambition. A city known for movie stars and palm trees, for dreams that take flight and sometimes fall. But beyond the postcard, beyond the traffic and the glitter, there's another side to Los Angeles. One few talk about, a side covered not in fame, but in silence. A neighborhood that once thrived with life and then vanished. Not overnight, but gradually, like a song fading at the end of a record. This is the story of Chávez Ravine, a place that is both real and forgotten. A neighborhood that stood on a hill, watched the city rise, and then was quietly erased. Some call it a ghost town, but there are no haunted houses here. No broken windows or creaking doors. What haunts this place isn't fear, it's memory. And tonight, as you close your eyes, we're going to walk through those memories together. Step by gentle step, no rush, no noise, just the soft weight of history settling around us. Well, listen to the wind brushing over empty hills. Well, hear the laughter that once echoed through the streets. Well, follow the path of a dream and the quiet sorrow of its ending. So settle in, get comfortable, let the city outside fade away, and let the forgotten voices of Chávez Ravine rise softly through the night. Close your eyes and picture Los Angeles in the 1920. The sky is soft with haze, the sun is beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the hills. In the folds of those hills, hidden just outside the city's ever-expanding reach, lies a small community called Chávez Ravine. There are no paved roads here, just winding dirt paths and homemade fences. The houses are humble, some built with wood, others with adobe, scrap metal, or stone. They lean slightly, patched and repaired by hand, and yet they stand proud. Every home has its own rhythm. You can hear the sound of a radio playing ranchera music through an open window, the sizzle of something cooking on a stove, children's footsteps racing through the dust, a rooster crowing. Though the morning passed long ago, Chávez Ravine isn't rich, but it's alive. It's made up of 3 neighborhoods, Bishop, La Loma, and Palo Verde. And the people who live here, mostly Mexican-American families, have roots that run deep. Some have lived in Los Angeles for generations. Others came fleeing revolution, poverty, or simply looking for a place to plant seeds. And here, on this hillside, they did just that. Gardens grow in every yard, lemon trees heavy with fruit, corn stalks standing tall, tomato vines climbing crooked wooden stakes. Chickens roam freely, goats nibble at weeds, water is fetched in buckets. Some homes have electricity, others light their rooms with candles after dusk. There are no sidewalks, no manicured lawns, but there is dignity, pride, community. Every Sunday, families gather at church, sometimes in a converted living room. Baptisms are celebrated with music and homemade tortillas. Weddings bring the whole neighborhood together. Children stay out playing until the stars appear, then fall asleep to the sound of crickets and quiet lullabies. Neighbors know each other by name. They look after one another. If someone is short on food, someone else shares. If a house is damaged in a storm, hands come together to rebuild it. There is hardship, yes. Life isn't easy, but there is joy, and more importantly, there is hope. Hope that this land, these hills, these gardens, will lead to something better for their children. That by working hard, planting roots, and staying together, the dream of belonging, of making a life, can come true. And so Chávez Ravine grows, quietly, proudly, a village above the city. While the world changes below, this hilltop neighborhood hums with the simple beauty of ordinary life. But outside the ravine, changes are coming. The city is hungry for space, for progress, for modernity, and the hills, with their scattered homes and dusty roads, start to look tempting. But here, in this moment, that future hasn't arrived yet. For now, Chávez Ravine belongs to the people who built it, and the dream still feels real. Time moves quietly at first. The 1930 turn into the 1940, and the world begins to shift. A great war takes hold, stretching across continents. Young men go off to fight. Women take on new roles. The city of Los Angeles grows busier, noisier, more crowded with every passing year. When the war finally ends in 1945, the country exhales. Soldiers return home, families reunite, the economy starts to roar. Factories hum, freeways stretch like arms across the land, and the city looks to the future, not just with relief, but with hunger. A new vision is rising, one filled with sleek lines, tall buildings, modern housing, and an idealized image of urban life. The old, the imperfect, the makeshift, all of it starts to look outdated, in need of improvement. In city offices, behind closed doors, a plan begins to form. Officials want to build a model neighborhood, something modern, something clean, something to show the world that Los Angeles is a city of the future. They call it Elysian Park Heights. It would have bright, uniform apartment buildings, wide sidewalks, schools, green lawns, modern kitchens, plumbing, community centers. Everything new, everything efficient, a place where working families could thrive. And they had the perfect place to build it, the hills above downtown. Chávez Ravine, from a planner's perspective, it made sense. The land was close to the city center. It had elevation. It offered a beautiful view. And, most importantly to those making decisions, it was easy to label the existing homes as substandard. Not everyone saw it that way. To the people living in Chávez Ravine, their homes were full of love, memories, and meaning. But to officials with blueprints in hand, they were seen as obstacles to something new. And so the letters began. They said the area was being chosen for redevelopment, that families could sell their land now and be among the first to move into the new apartments, that it was an opportunity, a better life, a gift of progress. Some believed the promise. They saw the artists' renderings, smiling families walking through leafy courtyards, children playing by fountains. They thought, if this is for us, maybe it is time to let go of the old ways. They signed, accepted the compensation, often far less than what their homes were worth, and left. Others resisted. They asked questions. What guarantees were there? Who exactly would qualify for this new housing? When would it be ready? The answers were vague, but the pressure was real. Some were offered deals they couldn't afford to refuse. Others were told they had no choice. Eminent domain, letters from lawyers, official seals, and slowly the neighborhood began to change. Homes set empty, yards overgrown, doors boarded up. Streets that once echoed with the sounds of daily life now stood quiet. Still, a handful of families stayed. They held on to hope, or perhaps to something deeper, something rooted in the soil. A sense of belonging that no blueprint could erase. All the while, city trucks began to appear. Surveyors, fences, earth-moving equipment parked at the edge of the ravine like silent beasts waiting to be unleashed. But then the plan stopped. A shift in politics swept through the city. The mood around public housing had changed. What was once called a gift to working families was now being painted as suspicious, even dangerous. Words like socialist were whispered in newspapers and campaign speeches. The dream of Elysian Park Heights, once so vibrant, began to fade. New leaders opposed it. Funding dried up. The plan was shelved. But Chávez Ravine was already half empty, its people scattered, its streets silent, its promises broken. No new housing came. The land remained, still, waiting, and for those who had stayed, who had believed the dream was for them, the question remained, what now? And so the neighbourhood stood still. No bulldozers moved, no apartments rose, no laughter returned. The promise that had been made to the people of Chávez Ravine dissolved, not loudly, but slowly, like fog lifting from the hilltops to reveal nothing at all. Where there was supposed to be a brand new community, there was only dust. Grass grew long between cracks in forgotten roads. A breeze swept through open lots where homes once stood. Empty, quiet, abandoned. But this wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the silence of something unfinished, of something that had been taken and never replaced. City officials no longer spoke of Elysian Park Heights. Meetings were postponed, then cancelled. Articles that once praised the project vanished from the newspapers. New debates filled the air about politics, control, and image. The public housing project became a burden, a relic of an administration no longer in power. Some called it a failed idea, others just stopped mentioning it. But for the families who had sold their homes, many under pressure, most for far too little, the loss was not theoretical. It was real, concrete, irreplaceable. The hills had once echoed with music, conversation, and everyday life. Now they stood like a scar, exposed, quiet, and uneasy. A few families remained. Their homes stood like islands in a growing sea of emptiness. Weeds climbed the fences. Coyotes returned to the edges of the hills. Some nights, those left behind could hear only the wind in their own memories. And yet they stayed. Why? Maybe because they had nowhere else to go. Maybe because they still hoped the city would keep its word. Or maybe because they couldn't bring themselves to leave the place where they had buried their grandparents, planted their first trees, raised their children. They swept their porches, they patched their roofs, they carried on with daily life, even as the world around them shifted, faded, and forgot. One such family was the Archigas. They were among the last who refused to leave, and their story would become the most well-known. But they were not alone. A handful of families held on, like leaves clinging to a branch after the storm. These residents lived in a strange limbo, not fully welcome, not fully gone. Their homes were surrounded by barbed wire in some places. They received notices, warnings, and in some cases, eviction letters that seemed to come and go with the tides of bureaucracy. The neighborhood no longer belonged to them on paper, but in spirit it did. It always had, and still they waited, for years, waited for the promised apartments, waited for some kind of solution, waited for their voices to be heard again. They held community meetings in empty yards. They lit candles on porches that no longer had neighbors. They shared food and stories, their children growing up with a strange awareness that their home was now a target, that their lives were somehow in the way. Photographers came, sometimes, reporters. Now and then they took pictures of peeling walls and vacant lots, wrote articles with titles like The Ravine That Time Forgot. But no action followed, and while the rest of the city boomed, skyscrapers rising, highways stretching, Chávez Ravine stood frozen in place, caught between what it had been and what it would never become. In time, a new idea began to surface, one that would once again reshape the land, but not for the people who had lived there. The plans for housing were gone, but another vision, another kind of dream, was waiting in the wings. It came not with promises of community, but with promises of spectacle. Not homes, not schools, not parks, but something that would draw thousands, night after night. Something that would erase the past completely, but before that new chapter began, there would be one last moment, one final stand, one last family, standing quietly on a hill, watched by a city that had already turned its gaze elsewhere. The story would mark the end, not just of a neighborhood, but of a promise never fulfilled. It was a warm morning in May, 1959. The sky over Los Angeles was calm, but in the hills above downtown, something was stirring. Cameras were being set up, reporters gathered, trucks rumbled quietly up narrow roads. Neighbors leaned out of windows to watch. Something was about to happen. At the center of it all stood a single house, a modest home, pale walls, a slanted roof, flowers growing in mismatched pots, toys scattered near the porch, wine chimes clicking softly in the morning breeze. This was the home of the Archiga family. They had lived in Chávez Ravine for decades. Their children were born here. Their grandchildren played on the same hillsides they had once run across themselves. Inside the house were photographs, keepsakes, handwritten recipes, rosaries, heirlooms passed down through generations. This house was more than a structure. It was a story. It was memory in brick and wood. And on that day in May, it was about to be taken away. The city had made its decision. The land was no longer theirs. The final families who had stayed, resisting pressure, holding on through uncertainty, were to be removed. The press had been invited, and so, beneath the warm Californian sun, the final chapter of Chávez Ravine would be performed for an audience. But there would be no shouting, no barricades, no armed resistance. The Archigas responded with silence, with dignity. They stood on their porch as city officials arrived. A crowd of officers in suits and ties, manned with clipboards, cameramen, microphones. The matriarch of the family, Aurora, did not yell. She simply stood still, her hands calm, her eyes steady. The family was given minutes to collect their belongings. Pillows, chairs, a crucifix, a baby's blanket. Each item carried a weight that could not be measured. Neighbors wept quietly from behind fences. Reporters scribbled notes. The silence was thick, not with fear, but with mourning. Not one person from the city said, "We're sorry." They said, "It's time to go." And when the Archigas were gone, the house was not left standing. It was torn down immediately, right there, on camera. The walls were pulled apart. The roof collapsed inward. The garden was trampled. The flowers crushed beneath hurried boots. By sundown, there was nothing left, not even a shadow, just earth, flat and bare. The city called it a necessary step, a process, a matter of paperwork and policy. But to many, what happened that day felt like something else. It felt like the quiet burial of a community that had never been allowed to say goodbye. In the weeks that followed, the press moved on, the trucks disappeared, new fences went up, construction began, but the memory of that day would linger, soft but sharp, like the aftertaste of something bitter and once sweet. Those who had once lived in Chávez Ravine carried that moment with them for the rest of their lives. They told their children, "We used to live there." They told their grandchildren, "We built our home with our own hands." And sometimes, when driving past the stadium that would rise in that same place, they would glance out the window and whisper, more to themselves than anyone else, "That was ours." What happened to the Archiga family wasn't just about land. It was about the end of a story that had never been allowed to finish, the end of a promise once made with smiles and handshakes, and broken with silence. That house was the last piece of Chávez Ravine, and with it, the hill went quiet again, but only on the surface. Because some stories don't disappear, they lie in wait, in photographs, in memories, in the pause between heartbeats, waiting for someone to listen. Once the dust settled, the hill was no longer a neighborhood, no longer a community. It had become a blank slate, but it wasn't left empty for long. Almost as soon as the last house was torn down, new plans appeared, but this time they had nothing to do with homes, schools, or families. This time the dream was different. It was louder, brighter, bigger. It was baseball. The Brooklyn Dodgers, a storied baseball team with generations of fans on the East Coast, were looking for a new home. And Los Angeles, hungry for a national spotlight, saw an opportunity. They made an offer. The Dodgers accepted, and suddenly the quiet hills of Chávez Ravine became the foundation for a new kind of spectacle. Not a neighborhood, a stadium. For many, it was a thrilling announcement. Los Angeles would become a major league city. The biggest stars in baseball would come here. A massive, modern stadium would rise from the California earth. It would be a symbol of growth, status, power, and for most Angelenos, especially those who had never set foot in Chávez Ravine, it was a cause for celebration. But for those who had once lived on the hill, it was something else. It was a second loss, a transformation that erased not just the houses, but the memory of what came before. Construction began in 1959, the same year the Archigas were removed. Bulldozers carved through the land. Cement was poured, steel beams reached toward the sky. Workers in hard hats shouted directions. Dust and noise filled the ravine once again, this time in service of something that was never meant for the people who had lived there. By 1962, Dodger Stadium opened its gates. It was vast, gleaming, filled with tens of thousands of seats, vendors selling peanuts and hot dogs, children wearing caps, eyes wide with excitement, fireworks after a home run, roars of the crowd echoing across the city. It was everything a stadium should be, but beneath it, beneath the field, the concrete, the parking lots, were the stories of another world. There are no plaques in the stands mentioning the neighborhood that came before. No signs with the names of the streets that once twisted through the hills. No mention of the gardens, the goats, the music that used to float through the canyon air. Yet sometimes, if you stand in just the right spot, you can feel it, in the soft dip of a hill that was never flattened, in the shape of a curve where a road once ran, in the hush before the crowd cheers, when for a moment the wind moves freely through the concrete and steel. You can feel it, a whisper, a shadow, Chávez Ravine. To some, Dodger Stadium is a place of joy, of pride, a reminder of sunny afternoons and favorite teams. But to others, it is built on silence, a silence heavy with memory. They drive past it and feel both love and sorrow, pride in the city they call home, and grief for the home they were forced to leave behind. There's no blame in the air, no anger shouted into the night, just a quiet truth that progress often forgets where it came from. And sometimes, beneath the roar of a crowd, there is a softer sound, almost inaudible, of something that was buried, but not entirely gone. A home, a hill, a family, a dream, and for those who listen closely, that sound never fades. Why do we call Chávez Ravine a ghost neighborhood? There are no broken buildings, no empty storefronts or boarded-up windows, no creaky floorboards, no shattered glass. The streets themselves are gone. Even the names of those streets have vanished from city maps. And yet, the ghost remains. You see, some ghosts do not haunt with sound or shadow. Some haunt with memory. The land beneath Dodger Stadium is quiet now, when the crowd goes home, when the lights dim, and the breeze carries the scent of grass and popcorn into the night. But beneath that surface lies something older, something deeper, a community that once lived, left, struggled, and dreamed right there under your feet. And it hasn't been forgotten, not entirely, not by the people who lived there. Not by their children, not by those who've spent decades keeping the story alive. Because even when buildings fall and names disappear, a neighborhood survives in the hearts of those who remember it. Old photographs show children in sun-faded overalls, running barefoot through gardens. You can still find those photos, creased, sun-kissed, stored in shoeboxes or family albums. Smiling faces in front of hand-built houses, women holding aprons full of lemons. A birthday party under a clothes line. Simple things, small things, sacred things. In some homes across Los Angeles, there are still jars filled with earth from the hill where a house once stood. There are handwritten recipes passed down from abuelas who once baked bread in backyard ovens built from stone. Stories are told around kitchen tables. They said they'd build new homes for us, a grandfather might whisper, but they built a stadium instead. Sometimes the stories are told with tears, sometimes with a shrug and a soft laugh. Because life went on, it always does. The families who were displaced found new places to live, new schools, new jobs, but something stayed behind, something they still carry, a sense of loss, not loud or dramatic, just a quiet absence, like a door that was closed gently but never reopened. In murals across the city, Chávez Ravine is painted in rich colors as a symbol, a reminder not just of what was lost, but of what it meant. There are poems written about it, songs, documentaries, community meetings, books passed from hand to hand. Artists who never lived there still feel drawn to the story, as if some invisible thread pulls them toward that hill. Because the story of Chávez Ravine is not just about displacement, it's about identity, about roots, about the right to exist in a place, even if it doesn't look like what progress expects. It's about how cities grow and who gets to stay when they do. Sometimes the ghost of Chávez Ravine appears in unexpected places, in the way someone pronounces an old street name that no longer exists, in the scent of roasted corn at a market, in a grandmother's lullaby, softly sung in Spanish, remembering a time when the stars over Los Angeles seemed brighter. The ghost is not angry, it does not seek revenge, it seeks only to be remembered. And slowly, piece by piece, that remembering is happening in school projects, in public art, in quiet car rides past the stadium, when someone in the passenger seat says, "You know, this used to be our neighborhood." It's not just the land that holds memory, it's the people. The ones who were there, the ones who listened, the ones who tell the story now, so it won't vanish completely. Chávez Ravine may be invisible to the eye, but it lives fully in the spaces between the concrete and the sky, in the memory of home. What do we learn from the story of Chávez Ravine? It's a question that doesn't have one answer. Maybe it's not even meant to, because stories like this one are not tidy. They don't wrap themselves up in neat conclusions. They linger. They echo, but they do teach us, gently, persistently. They teach us that progress has a cost, that even beautiful dreams, when not handled with care, can become instruments of loss. Chávez Ravine was not erased by disaster, not by fire or flood or time. It was taken apart by paperwork, by ambition, by a system that valued plans on paper more than people on porches. And yet, this story is not just about what was lost. It's about what survives, what endures, even when the buildings are gone. Community is not concrete. It's not measured in square footage. It's not found in glossy brochures or architectural drawings. It's in the way a neighbor brings you soup when you're sick. It's in children playing the same made-up game day after day, long after the sun has set. It's in gardens shared, songs remembered, doors left open. That's what was built in Chávez Ravine. Not just homes, but belonging, and the greatest tragedy of its loss may not be the removal of the houses, but the removal of that fabric, that soft, invisible thread that ties one life to another. And yet, the threads remain, because the families who lived there carried those threads with them, wove them into new lives, new streets, new neighborhoods. Still, they remember. And so should we, because stories like this remind us to ask better questions. When a city grows, we should ask, who gets to stay? When a neighborhood is labeled imperfect, we should ask, by whose standards? And when a promise is made, we should ask, who will be held accountable when it is broken? Chávez Ravine whispers these questions to us, and even if you've never been there, even if you didn't know it existed until tonight, the story touches something familiar. Because many cities have their own versions of this tale, displacement dressed as renewal, growth without roots, names erased, but the people who lived on that hill, they left more than memory behind. They left a lesson, one that flows through the bones of the city, even if the city doesn't speak it aloud. The lesson is this: history isn't just what gets written in books. It's what we choose to remember. It's what we say out loud when no one else is saying it. It's what we pass on, carefully, tenderly, like a small flame cupped between two hands in the wind. Tonight, we've walked through a place that no longer appears on maps. We've followed narrow dirt roads that were once filled with barefoot footsteps, through gardens that no longer bloom, past homes that live only in memory. We've listened, not for drama or spectacle, but for something quieter. The sound of a life once lived, of laughter caught in the hills, of stories almost forgotten. And now, as your body softens and your breathing slows, I want you to hold one final image in your mind. Picture a small home on a quiet hillside. It's modest, nothing grand. Maybe a crooked porch, maybe a tin roof. A breeze sways the clothes, drying on a line. The smell of tamales drifts from the open kitchen window. A child giggles behind the door. A dog naps in a sunspot. This place exists only in memory now, but memory is strong. And tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, I hope you carry that memory with you, not as a sadness, but as something tender, something sacred, because Chávez Ravine is more than a ghost town. It's a reminder that home is not about walls or ownership or fences. It's about people, about the way they care for one another, about the way they make something out of nothing, about how they sing, how they pray, how they dance, even when the world tells them not to. And even though the neighborhood is gone, its soul still hums beneath the surface, quiet, but steady. Maybe tomorrow, as you walk through your city, you'll notice something. An old house tucked between new ones, a mural on a wall, a street name that feels like a whisper from the past. And maybe you'll remember that cities are not built only with concrete. They're built with memory, with community, with stories. And it is up to us, all of us, to listen, to preserve what matters, to speak for those who weren't heard in their time, to say their names, to tell their stories, to leave space for history that doesn't shine, but still glows gently in the dark. So tonight, let your mind rest easy. Let the story of the hill settle softly inside you, like the last light of day slipping behind the mountains. Let it remind you that even silence has a voice, and even when something is gone, it is never truly lost, if we remember it. Good night. Sleep well. You are not alone.